And of course, now I turn to the reason why we're all here this evening, and that's to hear our speaker this evening, Warren Taylor. It's kind of hard to introduce Warren because I think we all have little bits of knowledge about Warren, and what's so amazing is that Warren has returned, of course. He was raised in Ohio, an OSU grad, and of course we forgive him for that. But he returned to Ohio in the 1990s in order to start a dairy consulting business here. That's after decades around the world designing dairy plants and dairy systems. So we, of course, have been the great beneficiaries of his return to Ohio because we get to have Snowville milk and cream. Warren returned, and his statement in a recent article in this Dispatch was that he came because he wanted to make milk and yogurt the way he thought it should be made. And so, without further ado, we'll hear from Warren on exactly how to do that. Warren?
Thank you. So tonight we're going to talk about food labeling, sovereignty. You know, I don't know how many of you have been tracking what goes on, but we were the only democracy in the world that didn't require country of origin labeling for our meat for 20 years. And when it was finally put into the Farm Bill, I don't know how many years they refused to fund it. And we had it for a couple of years in this country. And now the trade agreements that we're engaged in, we're being told by the World Trade Organization that, oh, we can't do that. That denigrates some other country because it implies maybe that it's, well, it's just not fair, you know, to know if it came from Brazil or Canada or Mexico or here. Doesn't make any sense to me. Does that make sense to any of you? This is supposedly the greatest nation in the world, and we're letting business interests from other countries tell us what we can put on our food. That ought to be disturbing. But I'm really here to tell a story that's even more disturbing than that. I'm here to tell you the story that our own government doesn't want you to know what's in your food. And I've been working very closely on these issues. I was on the Hill twice last fall. I'm probably going to be there within weeks right now because of the labeling bills that are going through. And I may give you a little bit, I hope I give you a little bit of a perspective, my perspective anyway, for what it's worth, as to what's happening right now with food labeling. Because the language that we use, the words that we use, what we're allowed to say on our food says everything about what's going on in America today and what we accept. But I hope I'm also here to give you some good news, because I believe we're finally in a position where we can do something about some of these problems. Because I think the big bad bullies have gone so far that we can shame them. They've overreached. So that's the optimistic news I'm giving you today. So I hope this is a smiley message I've got to deliver today. So yeah, this bill says we don't have to tell you. So let me see. So I say food labeling is the secret battleground on which the war for ownership of America's food supply is being fought. If the control of what we're allowed to put on our food labels rests in the hands of people whose interest is controlling what we eat, they're going to tilt that labeling for their agenda. And if you want to see what's going on, remember, Coalition for Safe, Affordable Food. Because all you have to do is go online, go to YouTube, and put in Coalition for Safe, Affordable Food. And you'll find out from the people who are making the safe, affordable food why it is that we need to have a food labeling bill that makes sure that you buy the right thing. The stuff that they want to buy so they can feed the world, so we can have affordable food. So the safe food is the food which is grown by putting a 1/4 pound of poison on every acre of farmed land in America. That's the safe food. And the affordable food is the food that's subsidized with a $1 billion a week agriculture subsidy program. The example I like to give in the state of Ohio is our confined animal operations, which have ballooned here in the last 5 or 6 years, turned Lake Erie green. So that affordable food that they're making, you taxpayers get the privilege of buying every confined animal feeding operation in Ohio. They're going to get $100,000 from each and every one of you. $100,000 paid for by each and every one of you. So they can build manure pits to solve this problem of the manure ending up in our water systems. So you pay for that so you can have affordable food. So this is the Safe, Affordable Food Coalition. Thomas Jefferson, I love this quote. I've used this at food talks for 10 years. When our federal government skews our food labeling to the agenda of industrial agriculture, they're effectively deciding what foods we eat. They're deciding who the winners and losers are in the American food system. A year and a half ago, Snowville Creamery became the first dairy operation in America, other than certified organic operations, to get approval to label our dairy products as produced by cows that are not fed GMO feed and forage. So that labeling has been on our containers now for 18 months. We got it by working with our local Department of Agriculture. The head dairy guy agreed with me. I should be able to tell the truth on my cartons as to what I do. So as long as you make true statements, as long as you can validate and verify them, you can put it on your carton. Of course, we've known each other for 15 years, so we had a relationship and it made sense. This is a lot of writing here, and I'm just going to breeze through it. Our American food labeling should have the pride of American principles. Democracy is based on an informed choice. We ought to be democratic in our food. If we can't make an informed choice, what do we have? It should support consumers who want to make informed choices and the sustainable, progressive farmers who make these products. Clearly, every poll, every survey shows the American people want to know more about where their food comes from. They want transparency as to the methods the farmers are using. They want to understand the ingredients that are in their food. This is what everybody knows is happening. So when you go to, when we consider how to do labeling laws in this country, I think we need to consider flexible and resilient labeling principles that can be used to guide labeling policies so it encourages innovation and optimization, differentiation in the marketplace. These all have to do with free market principles, fundamental ideas. We should be able to differentiate what's in the marketplace. You know, up to now, the food labeling fight in this country has been around GMO labeling, right? Whether or not we're going to have mandatory GMO labeling. But we're the only industrialized democracy in the world that doesn't have it. 90% of our people want it. But I'm not really here to advocate tonight for GMO labeling. I think that the fact that they've succeeded for so long in keeping it from happening, that shouldn't be our ask. I don't think we're going to get it first. I think we need to ask for something simpler, more obvious, inarguable, and succeed in getting something. Our labeling policies should serve the future, not some present status quo. This is how the labeling is being done now. It's to serve a status quo. It's to serve an industrialized agriculture. It's to lean your choices in the direction of what is the vast majority of food right now, industrially produced food. To the extent practical, the food industry should use science. If you go on the Coalition for Safe and Affordable Food, you'll find that, boy, they want to talk about science. Well, we'll talk about the science of putting poison on food later in the talk, because the science is compelling. And they don't want to hear any of it. They don't want you to hear any of it. And the discussion around genetically modified organisms, around genetically engineered food, is carefully kept away from the discussion of poison. We had 2 days of testimony in the Senate in October that was supposed to be a great national discussion about genetically engineered foods. And the guy who was running the show got up, and in the second paragraph of his talk he said, and we've all proven and we all know that all these genetically engineered foods are safe. So let's proceed with our 2 days of hearings agreeing that we all agree on that. Well, I don't think God can make a safe poison, so I sure don't think Monsanto can. And I think that we would have done a lot better in the progressive food industry if we started talking about poison a long time ago. You know, I worked in the civil rights movement, and the analogy to me is, you know, I think that having to talk about genetically engineered foods without focusing on poison would be like trying to work in the Jim Crow South in the 1950s and be able to talk about integration and segregation, but you couldn't mention lynching. You know, it's time to get honest about what's really happening in our food supply, what's really happening to our children, and what's really happening to our government that's violating fundamental principles of America's democracy with something as fundamental as food. Labeling regulations can be based on explaining production methods and also quantifying particular components and nutritional attributes of the food. Both of these must be accurate and clear to sincerely educate customers so they can make their own choices. Our first marketing director in Columbus used to say, "We don't market, we inform." And I think this is what every food producer should aspire to do. It's just inform. Don't spin. Be honest. Be clear. You guys ring my chain if you ever see anything in print from us or ever see us doing anything you think is different. We're not trying to sell Snowville Creamery. We're trying to explain a very complex food, dairy products, and allow you to make your own choices. I want to be your dairy nerd more than I want to sell you Snowville Creamery. We believe label claims should be based on verifiable production methods. Right now, the big fight in food labeling is they want to have names. They want to use words. Humane, sustainable, natural, non-GMO. Unfortunately, they're trying to define those words for the status quo, for industrial agriculture, so that a large confined animal feeding operation can be labeled humane. So monoculture farming can be labeled sustainable. So food produced with GMOs can be labeled natural. They're stealing the very words. 2 weeks ago, the United States Department of Agriculture, the USDA, rescinded a 10-year-old standard for grass-fed beef. It took 6 years for the honest grass-fed beef farmers, who were not feeding any grain at all. 6 years it took them to get the federal government to defend and set a standard for what grass-fed beef meant. because there were lots of farmers that were willing to say grass-fed. Well, they were grass-fed for 70% of their life. They just got finished on grain in a feedlot for the last, 4 weeks. Isn't that grass-fed? Well, it is now, again. They stole a brand from honest farmers who were doing it one way, and they gave it to their competitors who were cheating. This is 2 weeks ago. And they explained that they needed to do this because that brand was contrary to efficient marketing of agricultural products in the best interests of shareholders and consumers. Now, I want you to think about this a little bit. When they say shareholders, what do they mean? Corporations, right? It was multinational corporations that helped kill Cool. The largest beef company in America, it used to be American, it's now Brazilian. The largest pork company in the world used to be American, now it's Chinese. But this concern about the corporations and then saying against the best interests of the corporations and the consumers in the same breath. What? Does that make your head spin? Oh, don't worry. What's good for General Motors is good for America. This is the same basic assumption that industrial agriculture is trying to shove down the American people's throat. There's only one good way to grow food. It's the industrial way. It's the only way to have affordable food. And you really shouldn't choose anything different. So, labeling used to be used to inform consumers about what they were about to purchase. It's been used to favor pro-industrial agriculture and biotech agriculture agenda for years. Last July, the House of Representatives passed H.R. 1599, which was named on the face of the bill the Safe and Accurate Food Labeling Act. Again, you see how that word safe is used? If industrial agriculture is safe, I guess Snowville Creamery maybe isn't safe. You see how they're using language and words? They're stealing them from us. So, based on its actual content, the sustainable food community more appropriately calls it the Dark Act, deny Americans the right to know. Because what it said was that we're not going to have mandatory GMO labeling. Well, that's been the way it's been for 20 years. And that's what everybody reacted to when the bill passed. But they slipped in something even worse. They affirmed that we're not going to have mandatory GMO labeling in this country, but they upped the ante and the food community missed it. Because they put in a single paragraph in the section on non-genetically engineered food that said, even if you feed animals GMO feed, you can label their meat, milk, and eggs as non-GMO. Does that make sense to you guys? It makes even less sense if you look up the act, because that's on page 19, they have that paragraph. And on page 17, they have a paragraph that says exactly the opposite. Just what you would expect. In order to label livestock agriculture products as being non-GMO, you have to feed them non-GMO feed. 2 pages later, they say exactly the opposite. Do you think this is clear labeling? Do you think this is truthful labeling? Do you think the processes that we're going through in Washington, D.C. that gets a bill like that, it was voted, there were only 2 of the 16 representatives in the state of Ohio who voted against it. Everybody else voted for it. So we hired a national polling organization to do a legitimate poll of 600 Ohio registered voters. And so we asked them, what do you think? If you saw a dairy product in the store that said non-GMO, would you expect that the cows were fed non-GMO feed? 3/4 of them, 76% said yes, of course. Now, I took that to Washington, D.C., called on my 2 senators and my 2-year congressman's office with that information. And my 2-year congressman, a good Reagan Republican down in Meigs County by the name of Bill Johnson, when he looked at the survey results, when I explained to him that when that Dark Act passed in July, a cheese company that was going to make non-GMO cheese with our milk canceled their offer to pay us $26 for every 100 pounds of that milk, and went back and said, well, we'll have to keep paying you $13 like we pay everybody else for cheese milk, because it looks like there won't be such a thing as real non-GMO cheese. When I explained all this stuff to him, he was quick to say, hey, you're right, I shouldn't have done that. So again, the ante's being upped. They're going from saying, oh, not mandatory, to actively misleading us. So I'm going to tell you, give it a little history to try to get you to understand some of the nuance of how food labeling's been twisted and turned. In 1996, the first genetically engineered issue was bovine growth hormone, a hormone that was injected into cows to increase the amount of milk that they produced. And when it happened, right away, dairy processors whose farmers didn't use the hormone started to label their products accordingly. FDA, USDA forbid them from doing it because they had decided there was no difference. And to say that there was a difference, to say you weren't using the hormone, would imply there was a difference that didn't exist. And it would make maybe people think that the stuff that was produced by cows getting shot with a needle was different. And it wasn't any different, don't you know? Well, Ben & Jerry's, Stonyfield, a bunch of other people went and sued, and it took them about a year to get the right to put them on the label. But then FDA said, oh yeah, you can say you don't use it, but you got to put this on the label. According to the FDA, no significant difference has been shown between milk derived from cows treated with artificial growth hormones and cows not treated. That's a horrific photo. It's, in fact, in 2010, I was on Governor Strickland's hormone labeling committee because the state of Pennsylvania came out and said, we don't care what anybody says, we're not going to allow any hormone labeling in our state. Because they had states' rights to control their labeling. And it was known by those of us who were in the industry that they had 6 other states lined up to do the same thing. They were hoping to turn the clock back, that you wouldn't even be able to do this in 2010. The state of Ohio actually sided with the federal government and their desire to have this statement still on milk cartons in the state of Ohio. But a bunch of people sued the state of Ohio when it went to federal court. And the federal court reviewed the original documents that FDA and USDA were given in the 1990s. Oop, wrong way. In the 1990s. And they found that the data showed increased levels of IGF, insulin growth factor, related to every cancer in the milk. They found that it increased the incidence of infected udders. They found it dipped the protein level in the milk produced. So accordingly, they said, well, the disclaimer doesn't have to be used anymore. But I think the really important point was that our federal government is not a proper judge of what constitutes a difference or not. Here's where we're going. 2016, the bill that's about to go into the Senate right now, all of these things are planned. Natural can be GMO, sustainable, can be industrial agriculture. CAFOs are humane, and animals fed GMOs can have their livestock products labeled non-GMO. Are you surprised? Do you want to know why this is happening? It's happening because every major food company in America has seen decreasing sales, decreasing profits. Monsanto's stock is down 30%. We're in a perfect storm showing the limitations of industrial agriculture. Industrial agriculture corn is being grown with the highest costs of seed and poison and agricultural inputs, except for gas, diesel, in a long, long time. But the price has crashed. It's low. And farmers that are planting non-GMO corn and soybeans are being paid a premium. This is the result of you not wanting to buy these foods. They're changing the labels without changing what they're doing. So when you go to the grocery store and what used to say nothing on it is now natural, is now humane, is now sustainable, but nothing changed in the way those foods are produced or processed. Isn't that misleading? So, here's my good news that I mentioned before. I met with my House representative. He gave me the best line that he could. I'm ashamed I didn't come up with myself. You are what you eat. That's what he greeted me with in his office to tell me he agreed with me. This exemption paragraph is a clear example of a special interest loophole. It's black and white. I think every one of the two-year congressmen, the two-year representatives to Congress who voted for that bill would agree if you and I went into his office together and met with him and said, look, you know, I'm in Ohio, I'm in your constituency, and I drink Snowville milk, and I think Snowville is a business that should be treated fairly. And when you change the rules so that people who use GMOs can label their milk non-GMO, what's Warren supposed to call his milk at Snowville Creamery? They're taking away my ability to differentiate to my customers what I'm doing different. What are they going to take away next? Democracy's great strength is engaged citizens' participation. I'm sorry, but I'm 65 years old. I worked in civil rights when King was alive. I worked in a TB hospital in Haiti in 1968. I worked in the anti-war movement. I was a conscientious objector. Back then, we had more control of our Congress than we got now. Back then, we were able to do things. We were able to accomplish things because we were trying. I think everybody's given up, you know. Don't give up. Our suggested call for action is for all of the 16 representatives to sign a letter or a resolution saying, hey, this is wrong. At least the cows have got to be fed non-GMO feed to have their milk products labeled as non-GMO. If we can accomplish this, we can take this on the road to every state in the union. So ask to get it removed from the text of 1599 because that's being used as the foundation for the Senate bill. And affirm that this can't happen. Livestock-fed GMOs can't have their products labeled non-GMO. Because the real secret of GMOs is it's all about the livestock. Don't worry about getting GMO blueberries or quinoa or whatever, you know. The poison that's put on the ground in America is put on there to grow corn and soybeans. And if people can have access to non-GMO meat, eggs, and milk, they'll buy them. And if they buy them, they'll start to change. They'll start to decrease the amount of corn and soybeans that are planted and grown with poison in this country. And if we can have one victory, prove to ourselves we can accomplish one thing, just ask for one thing in the Senate bill. Don't let cows fed GMOs make milk that's called non-GMO. Just one thing. We'll have proven to ourselves and to them that we can affect change. So I'm proposing that instead of making labeling a game of a brand, of names, of words, that special interests can define, contrary to what people would even understand, and arguing one issue at a time where we lose, that the non-GMO livestock product criteria is an obvious thing we need. But we need to state clearly that honesty will be allowed. I mean, this may sound ridiculous to you, but this is where we are. You're not going to get the sustainably produced sort of food you get from Snowville and other people if we can't even be honest about what we're doing, and if somebody else can be dishonest about what they're doing. Misleading labeling is not allowed. They have all kinds of justifications why misleading labeling is allowed, even while misleading labeling is not allowed. They know they're misleading you with their labeling. They're doing it cynically and intentionally. And they're telling you that they're doing it out of respect for what's best for you, so you can have cheap food. Differentiating will be allowed. Right now the laws say you can't use labeling that would suggest that it's different from something else that we say is the same. But they've already proved that they're not honest and fair in determining what is the same. So let's just let consumers decide for themselves based on being able to simply say what you're doing. The Non-GMO Project has been trying to put together livestock agriculture with a butterfly for years. I did it in 2 months with my Ohio Department of Agriculture. They were trying to put together a brand, a strict system, a set of standards that required third-party valuation, and yada, yada, yada. And I know they're working with all the best intentions, but at some point you got to measure your systems and how you're going about your methods by the results. We can show every dairy farmer, every dairy processor in America how to be non-GMO promptly. My brother happens to run a little sour cream company called Daisy Brand. He and I both believe that the entire milk supply in America could be non-GMO within 24 months. As long as we don't have the federal government trying to limit access to honest non-GMO dairy products like this. Clarity is primary. When I went to start Snowville Creamery, I went and met with the owner, the third generation owner of Daisy Brand, because he understood branding. So I asked David Sokolsky, what's branding about? And of course he tried to duck it. He said, oh, it's too important, I pay for that to get done. And I think I said, David, don't tell me that. Just tell me. And he did, real simply. He said branding is taking a product that has one or two specific attributes and then wrapping words around those attributes, one or two words at most for each attribute. And those words have to be so clear that every single person who reads them has the same understanding of what they mean. That's branding. And he said, then you grow your market so you're the low-cost supplier and then you're a shark. Well, I'm not trying to be a shark, but I'm sure trying to grow the business of making the food that the people in America want. So here we go. We're going to run down those same 5 things. The Senate bill now we're talking about that we could wake up in the morning and find out was passed yesterday, the way business is done in Washington, D.C., unfortunately. But it should clearly state and give no exception. Animals fed GMOs can't be labeled as non-GMO. No restrictions to be put on a food producer or processor from honestly stating on their package how it was produced. This protected labeling may be described as processing claims and must be verified in a reasonable fashion that can be validated by existing food processing and labeling state regulatory agencies. We don't need to turn this into something that costs Snowville Creamery $20,000 and a year of paperwork in order to get done. Here's the survey that we had done. Polling customers with regard to their expectations and understanding of given labels is the best way to test whether proposed labeling is misleading. Come on. Let the people decide. Differentiating will be allowed. Labeling regulation may not limit clearly and honestly labeling any given food with regard to how it was produced and processed, on the basis that that differentiation is an unfair denigration of another method. What a ridiculous precept. This is what was written into our federal laws and guidelines around GMO labeling 20 years ago. If they can't be honest with us now, and we can't make an honest choice now, 20 years into this, will we ever be able to? Oop. Clarity. The purpose of labeling is to communicate how a food was produced and processed. Everyone who reads a given label should have the same understanding of what it means. Seems pretty straightforward, doesn't it? It's even worse than you think. So we've got some handouts here that I assembled around the issue of poison. And I save this for last because it's a pretty grim topic. But now that I've given you good news that we can do something about this and a call to action of what to do, it isn't that bad to go visit your representative. It's kind of fun, really. It's kind of exhilarating. But this is where we're at. This is from Bob Dylan's Masters of War in 1963. He was talking about the nuclear apocalypse, right? You've thrown the worst fear that can ever be hurled, fear to bring children into the world. For threatening my baby unborn and unnamed, you ain't worth the blood that runs in your veins. The masters of the war today are the war against life forms. It's a war of poison. And unfortunately, I'll leave that one up. Unfortunately, the poisoning of our children in America has been going on for more than a decade. The poisons that they're using, despite their claims, are increasing in the volume of use and in the strengths of the poisons they're using. And we've got handouts here that you can take with you that are 4 pages. One is a 2-page New England Journal of Medicine, in which in a single paragraph they said that the evaluation by the federal government of our, do we have it? Can you bring it up to me, Amanda, Jesse, I'll read it word for word if somebody can grab that. There's a whole folder of them that Jesse was bringing. But anyway, basically it said the testing of all these products, or the approval of these poisons, were based on 1980s and 1990s research done by the chemical industry, never peer-reviewed. That's bad. These studies predated current knowledge of low-dose, endocrine-mediated, and epigenetic effects and were not designed to detect them. The risk assessment gave little consideration to potential health effects in infants and children, thus contravening federal law. Our government is breaking its own laws, and we are not calling them to account. This was published 2 months before the Senate hearings on GE Foods started with a declaration that they were safe. We all know that. So, for those of you who don't understand what this means, I'll explain it to you, because I was affected in the womb because my mother took hormones. I'm a DES baby, as was my sister. And you guys can all look up and see what that means, but they gave female hormones to women to prevent premature birth, and they figured out after a while it wasn't a good idea. So they kind of, there's a bunch of us who had that done to us. After they realized they shouldn't give it to people, they still put it in animal feed for 20 years. So my children are affected by that, and they've already pretty well determined that my children's children will be affected by that. These are hormone disrupting things. But epigenetics are even scarier, because we used to think that DNA was like a roadmap of what was going to happen. And now we know it's not that at all. Your DNA is an incredible range of multiple possibilities of probable realities. And the way your DNA is expressed is a result of a lot of things. Your emotional state. When you're in the womb, the emotional state of your mother, the food you eat, the level of nutrition, the stress you have in your life, for whatever reasons, including toxic chemicals. But those epigenetic changes that happen in response to those outside environmental factors, they're going to determine your children's future. Last year, 1 out of 50 children born in the United States of America was autistic. You know, the cancers have only gone up 3 to 5 times in the 20 years since we've been spraying these poisons on our food. Only 3 to 5 times. And people say us hippies making organic food aren't science-based. We love science. I love science. 2 causes of death have gone up 10 times in the last 20 years. Death due to intestinal infection and death due to Alzheimer's dementia. And the handouts have 3 MIT papers that bring together the science around Roundup, glyphosate, the most used herbicide poison in the world. And they actually show the biological and chemical pathways by which they believe these diseases are being affected by these chemicals. And they're being ignored by our own government. So here's my call to action, and there's handouts to support you in doing this. You write me. We'll send you materials. I'll teach you how to lobby. I started getting taught how to lobby 10 years ago. And I'm real comfortable on the Hill, and I'm real comfortable at the State House. And I can tell you it only takes about 1 or 2 visits. And there's few things make me feel as good as that. Maybe giving blood. I don't know. Seriously. This is the price of liberty. This is the price of freedom. This is the price of healthy children. If the future of your children's children can't motivate you to stop our government from doing what it's doing, I don't have a better card to play. think that's it.
Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
good. Yeah.
And would you mind a few questions?
I want all the questions we can have. I'm sorry I talked so long because I want it from you now.
And
Tell me.
also, following the questions, we'll have a reception with Warren's products and a few other goodies outside, so.
Thank you, Teresa. Yep. Yes.
I'm curious what you think about the organic label for organic milk. So organic, I think one of the standards is non-GMO feed for organically raised animals.
Absolutely is, absolutely. So certainly, organic, using the organic label is the best way to assure that you're getting, for livestock agriculture products, animal products that are made without GMOs. And then for that matter, anything. There's no GMOs permitted in any way, shape, or form in organic food.
But you don't use organic for Snowville, right?
The problem is that I'm a little bit of a contrarian, perhaps, but organic, our cows have a limit of 10 pounds of grain a day. Organic standards allow about 30. Organic feed has gone from being twice as expensive as conventional feed to being 3 times as expensive as conventional feed. That's not because it costs that much to grow, it's because it isn't being grown. The demand for organic livestock products has grown faster than the grain supply. The supply chain has matched it. And it's easy to see why. If you're a grain farmer that's got your soil destroyed, killed everything in it by using chemical fertilizers and Roundup pesticide, it's going to take you a long time to build that soil back and get it to have earthworms and humus. And these agricultural methods are extractive. They burn the carbon out of the soil that helps hold the water, that helps the bugs grow in there, that gives true soil fertility. Why is a grain farmer going to do that when he's got to go 3 years with this basically addicted ground that he's got to start bringing back organically, while in the meantime all he can get is commodity prices for his corn? I've refused to buy organic feed or ask my farmers to buy organic feed until we change the supply chain, because I'm not going to get it shipped from South Carolina or Canada. The amount of organic food products for animal livestock that's coming in right now from Asia would flabbergast you.
Say that again, the amount?
The amount of Asian-produced certified organic feed for livestock that's coming into this country now would shock you. So to me, converting livestock agriculture, like dairy, to non-GMO first is a process by which those farmers can become certified organic. Because you pay them an extra $1 a bushel for the first year, and the second year you give them $2 a bushel. Say, stop using the poison. Stop using chemical fertilizers. In 3 years, they'll be organic. A buddy of mine is high up in the largest feed mill in a multi-state area. He agrees with me. What's now $12 a bushel for organic corn, he believes we can make it here in Ohio for $6. We just have to have a way for the farmers to be able to have a financial way to jump that river, to bridge that chasm of having soil ruined by chemicals to being able to efficiently grow, put the inputs in. We got to give them a higher value. So that's my strategy. So, oh, come on. Please, is there, go ahead.
You said in the bill there's 2 different paragraphs. One says that you cannot use that label for things that have been fed in, and then on page 19 do you have any idea how you end up with such contradictory paragraphs?
By having dishonest people write bills in Congress?
And then
By having people who are cynically willing to mislead people?
So they thought they'd finish reading it at page 17 and wouldn't get to the back of it?
Oh, it's a trick, yeah.
Yes.
And then maybe you think, oh, well, I wonder which one, but they don't want you to do anything. The entire Dark Act, which the whole food community was railing about after it passed, I called the entire act a Trojan horse for that one paragraph. Because that one paragraph was the only thing they were changing. They were changing it so that all the meat, milk, and eggs in America could be labeled non-GMO, make people feel good to go buy them without changing anything that was done, without threatening the poison-based corn and soybean production. It's the basis of our industrial agriculture.
So you want to have a system where people write what, the farmer writes what they're doing. And could you describe how you think it will be, like what oversight will be when somebody who's not doing it still decides to write it on their label?
Certainly, because we got our non-GMO label 18 months ago. And then this last fall, we started producing yogurt from cows that had a certain genetics, A2. You can go on our website. Devil in the Milk is an international website that discusses it. But we did that. So we just put on our cartons from cows, 100% tested. And we've got the documentation. And there's a guy from Ohio Department of Agriculture in our, drives an hour or two to be in our milk plant every month. We got the documents, and we used the National Organic Program as our standard, as our method. So the documentation is consistent with the National Organic Program. We document what we do. We document the testing, and we keep it in books. And when that inspector comes in, he can look at them, just like he can look at our non-GMO feed testing. Every batch of feed that goes into our farms, has to be tested. Those test results we put up on our website so everybody can see them. And on that basis, they let us do that. And then we had a farmer that stopped using any grain at all, nothing but grass and hay. So we went to him again and we said, well, we want to put on the label that they're using no grain, it's just grass and hay. And they said, can you verify it? We said, yes. Do they have documentation? Yes. Well, then put it on. So this let us do things. USDA didn't get to take 6 years to let me put those 3 different things on my cartons. Because that's the kind of thing they're able to do. The game's rigged.
It seems like you're going to have a lot of information, though. I mean, if they're able to use the word natural on any food.
Darn near.
Yeah, then if you're doing something uniquely sustainable or whatever it is, you've got to then write the sentences that convey that. And you're saying, like, clarity is 2 words.
Yes.
I mean, that's why they want the word natural, because people have a concept of, oh, that must mean healthy.
Good. That's right. That's right. So that's why I don't like these words, because they can be used to lie. That's why I think we need to get more specific. Safe, accurate, affordable, natural, sustainable, humane. They're stealing these words from us. But if I say this is what I do, it's verified. My local regulatory official agrees it's verified. You see how powerful that is? You see what diversity we can have? You see what innovation we can have? Right now, as somebody who works in the dairy industry, I'm appalled by the fact that our federal government and people that I know and respect highly have spent years working with Europe, with New Zealand, Australia, South America, all around the world, traveling there to make sure if they're going to export dairy products to America, they have to have similar levels of safety, for human health safety. Not even talking about compositional or label claims, but just the safety with which the dairy products are produced. It has to be comparable, or they can't bring it into this country. Well, the new agenda in Washington, D.C. is that stifles innovation. So we're just kind of let the stuff come in. And this is in the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement. That you can't even hold a shipment at port until it's tested, as long as they have documentation. And as somebody who's worked internationally in food, I can tell you the easiest thing to cheat on is that kind of documentation. You asked me the question, what do you do about the cheaters? Well, I think it's important to recognize food safety regulation isn't intended to catch cheaters. Because I could go into any food plant I wanted to in the middle of the night and have it be turning out something bad in the morning. I'm a dairy nerd, right? Somebody's intentionally trying to cheat, that's one problem. But a documentation that guides it so it's done right, that's a different problem. And that's what basically food regulation is, both for safety and for labeling. We took a lot of guff with our non-GMO label, people saying, oh my God, but what if people like you were cheating? And my answer was, well, we ourselves have to test for antibiotics in the milk. Because a person could die of anaphylactic shock if they drank milk with an antibiotic that they were allergic to. They trust us to keep from killing people by doing it right and well. I don't think there's some higher level of assurance that we get or need in order to label our products. The documentation is there. The state regulatory people are used to reviewing documentation. This is basically the fundamental method of the National Organic Program. It's all based on documentation. It's a process-based standard. Yes?
So for the dairy farmers that you work with, is this economically sustainable for them? Is there enough of a market where people are willing to pay the high enough rates to sustain the actual dairy farmers?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, we're starting our 9th year. We're paying more than 1.5 times the going rate for milk. You know, the problem isn't the consumers. The problem is what happens out there in the marketplace, right? The local Kroger store, I'm told, is one of the highest selling Kroger stores in the state of Ohio. It sells about 10% of all the milk we sell. It's huge. But we're only in 4 other of the 250 Kroger stores in the state of Ohio. Kroger's never let us into a store in Cincinnati. In the stores we're in Columbus, they price our milk so they make $1 profit on every carton of milk. They don't make any more than 30 cents on any other milk they sell. That's the problem. It costs us 70 cents to deliver into a Kroger store in Columbus. That's what it costs us to drive a truck up there and deliver it. By the time that's marked up, that's 90 cents. That's the cost of our milk at a store in Columbus, Ohio. So when you see our milk for $4 a half gallon, it should have been more like $3 if we were allowed to take a semi-truck and unload our milk at the distribution center that Kroger uses to put milk into 250 stores in the state of Ohio, because they can do it for $0.10 a gallon. The problem is not what it costs to make food right and well and sustainably. The problem is systemic. It's a system problem. And Kroger is a member of the American Grocers Association, who is lobbying that animals fed GMOs should have their products labeled non-GMO. 3 years ago, they said their biggest agenda was to make sure that country of origin labeling was never went into effect before it actually had. That was their biggest agenda, was to prevent country of origin labeling. This is our problem, is that American citizens can't express their food preferences in the marketplace because the marketplace is so skewed. Yes?
Is it legal to label meat that it was produced in the United States? Is that still something you're allowed to do? You just aren't required to say it's from Brazil.
You know, this is a great question, because there's people in our Congress who made a big deal about saying, "Oh, we signed on to a resolution for voluntary country of origin labeling." And I literally asked them, "Oh, does that mean that I'm allowed to say it's from America?" And basically they blushed and said yes. Because that is kind of the next step. Just like, oh, you can't say you're not giving your cows bovine growth hormone. You can't say it's from America. It's the same. And if I can't find a way to put a label on my milk, my dairy products, that clearly differentiates the fact that I'm not feeding GMOs, when other people are allowed to label their milk non-GMO while they're feeding GMOs, again, it's been taken away. I can put it on my containers. It doesn't have any meaning in the face of somebody that gets to say the same thing with a different meaning.
Maybe we'll take one more question and then we
Oh,
can
yes.
continue the conversation
Yeah.
outside.
Yeah, I guess in animal agriculture, this effort to kind of label product non-GMO, I think is probably related a lot to the export market. And the ability, there are a lot of kind of more wealthy countries that can import a lot of our agricultural products that have pretty strict non-GMO regimes in place. So I think, from the industry's perspective, I'm sure one of the major reasons why they're doing this is to try to open the export market even wider.
Well, it's a fair assumption, but in fact, those countries, they have their own rules in place regarding food labeling in their countries. And just because we put non-GMO on it, they're not going to accept that. I can tell you, I don't foresee this happening, and I'm working on this internationally. I'm involved with organizations and people in Europe, and they're not concerned about it because they have rules. I have to tell you a little funny story, though. There was an article published in Europe that started off with my quote that the Dark Act had gone from affirming that we weren't going to get mandatory labeling to intentionally misleading. And the German guy, who's the top guy in Germany for their non-GMO labeling regimens, said, "This is outrageous. This is absolutely outrageous. I can't imagine the U.S. Congress passing such a law." He just couldn't believe it. And I said, I find it really ironic that in 2016, me, an American, is going to explain fascism to a German. And I wasn't joking. Because Mussolini defined fascism as governments and corporations working together for their mutual strength and power. You want to talk about using words and what their meaning is? One of my problems is I'm too plain spoken.
Why don't we at that point give our